Thank you for viewing this presentation on church electrical safety. I'm Al Tweeton. I'm a loss control specialist with Guide One Insurance. I just want to share some information about some of our experience with church electrical fires and encourage you to place a little more emphasis on the electrical system when you're doing surveys for Guide One. Just as a disclaimer before we get started, only licensed electricians working in compliance with NFPA 70E and wearing personal protective equipment can open electrical equipment and observe or work on exposed electrical components. Some of the pictures we're showing are just for examples only. We don't intend for you to see the insides of the electrical panels or to remove any covers. We just happen to have some pictures that represent the conditions that are possible, and one of the reasons why we're so animate about an every 3-year inspection by an electrician and preventive maintenance with our churches. A couple of risks, obviously, with being exposed to live electrical current is electrocution for one, but arc flash for two. And the temperatures of this molten vaporized metal is in excess of that of the sun. It's like 30,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So serious injuries have and do occur when exposed to live electrical systems when things go wrong. So the hazard is simply too great. Do not put yourself in any position where injury can. As I stated earlier, we have seen a dramatic increase in the severity of electrical fire losses, not so much in the frequency. Our frequency has remained relatively flat, but the severity has increased dramatically. Just year over year compared to last year at this time, our severity experience has increased by 500%. So we've seen 5 times the electrical fire loss dollars than we did last year. What we're looking for from you is an increased emphasis on the church's electrical systems. We want you to raise awareness with our customers while you're conducting your survey. We want you to provide us with more pictures of both good and bad conditions observed with their electrical system and their program so that we can make an informed underwriting decision and make appropriate recommendations to improve the risk characteristics of our customers. One change in the customer requirements that we would like to make is that you ask of our customer, do you have any recurring problems such as blown fuses, tripped breakers, flickering lights, and overheated appliance cords? And the reason we're asking this question is a lot of times when we're there, nothing wrong is occurring. And intermittent issues like these can be a strong indicator of overloaded circuits, loose connections, improper grounding, or rodent, bird, and bat damage. And we recognize that you may not be asking the person that would be most familiar with the electrical system or the person that's around the most to see those type of conditions, but we still think that there's a good chance that asking this specific question will lead us to make a recommendation that a qualified electrician, that a licensed electrician come in and do an inspection of their electrical system and make the appropriate recommendations and changes in their. All equipment, including electrical system, has a lifespan. We've found and we've been advised by electrical engineers that when an electrical system is over 30 years old, there's simply a greater potential for failure. We also recommend that every church have an electrical preventive maintenance program. It's very common within the churches to find that they have a preventive maintenance program for their heating, ventilating, and cooling system. It's much less common, unfortunately, for them to have the same type of a contract for their electrical system. And we'd certainly like to see a preventive maintenance program in place where a licensed electrician inspects their their electrical system every 3 years and perform a maintenance program, checking for clean, cool, dry conditions, and that the connections are tight. A clean and tighten program can greatly extend the service life of an electrical system at our churches. One condition that we feel very strongly about is the presence of pests. We need to make sure our churches, the building envelope is tight and that they're keeping out any rodents, bats, birds that can cause damage to the electrical components. Unfortunately, all these concealed spaces make great nesting grounds for these pests, and their nesting material is very combustible, and their bodily wastes are very corrosive and damaging. And then in a lot of cases, these animals will feed on these components, and they'll chew and damage wires and cause short circuits or arcing conditions that can lead to a fire. Pest populations thrive on the concealed spaces, attics, crawl spaces, wall cavities, and that unfortunately that's where all these wires and equipment are also located. So we can have all kinds of damage caused by these rodents that just simply goes undetected until. So we also need you to report any conditions of pest infestation, any nesting material that you see, make the recommendation that they have it removed, and if there's evidence that there's nesting material inside some of these boxes or panel covers, we need to know that as well so we can make the appropriate recommendation. The most common recommendation that we see, both from you and from our own people, is the clear space and combustible materials located too close to service panels and distribution panels. There are a couple of obvious reasons for this. First, emergency access in case they need to throw a switch or turn off a breaker. And then secondly, provide proper circulation around the equipment for proper cooling. And yet another reason to keep a 36-inch clear space around this switchgear is to prevent a fire in the case of an arc flash. You provide that clear space, it's much less likely that an arc flash or a spark from this equipment will start a fire. Something else we'd like to see at our churches, and some of this has to do with lockout, tagout, and just knowing which switch to throw in the case of an emergency. But we need to see that these panels are labeled, that the breakers and mains are labeled properly so that they can be de-energized in an emergency, and so that it's just understood very clearly which equipment is operated by this switchgear. Here's just an obvious example of an older installation, and the screw-in Edison-based fuses are still fairly common in our church population, and it's a concern for us. And this type of thing needs to be noted. We do need to make the recommendation for a preventive maintenance program, and in some cases we will make a recommendation that they update their system. We're still working with churches, and in some cases, when the funds aren't available and when the electrician can tell us that the system is adequate and that they're providing the proper protection against overcurrent and fire, we will certainly allow them to keep their old system in place. However, we do require that they have fuse stat holders and use fuse stats, and these simply help prevent overcurrent. And most common, we would see, a kitchen circuit that should have a maximum of a 20 amp fuse will have a 30 amp fuse screwed in. Or we'll have a lighting circuit that should have a maximum of 15 amp fuse with a 30 amp fuse, similarly a 30 amp fuse screwed in place. So those type of conditions need to be safeguarded against by using fuse stat holders and the appropriate sized fuse as designated or as prescribed by a licensed electrician, that appropriately sized fuse in place. The picture on the left shows an obvious overfusing condition. You've got a fake fuse installed. It's actually a little section of pipe that has been put in place. And you can see too, the fuse on the right has been hot, so we have a serious issue here. We don't expect you to view this type of thing, but just to help emphasize the need to have a licensed electrician come in. You don't know what's behind those panel covers, and periodically we just need to make sure that our churches are having the appropriate review done to make sure their system is safe. Then the image on the right is simply an example of a 30 amp fuse being installed in a circuit that should be equipped with 15 amp protection. Just a couple more obvious examples. On the left, we've got covers missing, and those covers are needed to prevent dirt, dust, moisture, and physical damage, as well as electrocution from happening. And then the image on the right, this is a little hard to see, but you can see the knockout at the top has been taken out. Whether this box was repurposed and they simply didn't, put that blank in place to cover that hole, or whether the electrician took out the wrong knockout when he made this installation. It's created a problem because now we have actually some cartridge fuses that have fallen through that hole and could cause a very serious problem. They could cause a short, they could cause an arc flash, they could cause a fire. So again, this is why we really need an electrician to come in and look at our systems. There's another problem we see all too often. Data system. Yeah, the image on your left is another situation we see all too common with our church customers, and whether it be for their computer systems or their phone systems, there are usually breakers that they simply don't want turned off. And a lot of times this becomes a problem when the church is switching the lights in the gymnasium or the fellowship hall by using the breakers. And we just need to eliminate the reason for the panel to be. The image on the left, we've got some missing blanks, some open spaces, and there's a serious electrocution hazard here. You're intended to switch these breakers on and off, so your hands are dangerously close to live current here, and it's also possible for dust, debris, rodents to get in and cause issues. So there needs to be blanks installed if you see this type of thing, and the picture on the right shows the actual blanks installed to prevent access or prevent dust and debris from getting into the panel. Another concern that we'd certainly like you to call to our attention is the presence of Federal Pacific stab lock breaker panels. And if you've been in the industry long enough, you've seen a lot of these, and you've probably seen a few with some char marks on them. They simply don't hold up. It was a bad design. the connections seem to fail, and then the overheating that those loose connections caused severely damaged and caused the breakers to not trip at all. It kind of welded those breakers in the on position. And these were widely installed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So we've still got thousands of them out there. And we need you to tell us if you find the Federal Pacific stab lock breaker panels at our churches. The failure rate is somewhere between 70 and 80% when these breakers that appear to be in good condition are tested. So again, it's simply something that needs to be called to our attention. And we do have a pretty good history with our churches. If we're able to show them the problem, they usually are very willing to make the correction. And we've had many cases where they simply can't make the correction. We feel the risk is too great, and we'll take some underwriting action and cancel that policy. Another kind of obvious indication that you've got an electrical problem is the presence of warm circuit breakers. And in this case, we've got a hot breaker, and we happen to have a thermal image of it. It's 148 degrees Fahrenheit. And this can be caused by a couple of different things. Most common, it's an overloaded circuit or a loose connection behind the panel. We have issued infrared thermometers to our field staff, and they use them in a very simple way. These are not expensive. They're between $30 and $50, and they're certainly not as sophisticated as the infrared cameras, but they do a pretty good job of just a quick reference temperature of electrical equipment. So our field staff, they just run them up the breaker panel, and when the temperature exceeds 120 degrees Fahrenheit, they take a picture of what you see in this slide, and they will submit this in a recommendation that a electrician be brought in to find out what the problem is and make the corrections. It's an indication that there is a problem. We've had very good luck with our churches when you can show them that there's a very, very real temperature difference here. They're very good about bringing someone in and having the situation. This is just more reason to have a licensed electrician come in periodically. If they open the panel covers up and see indication of an arc flash or a hot condition, it's a problem that needs to be fixed. The image on the left, you see some charring, some evidence of a flash by those kind of middle cartridge fuses. Then the image on the right, you see obvious melting of the insulation. You see some corrosion, and again, that's why we have an electrician come in. Knob and tube wiring. The presence of knob and tube wiring is a red flag for us. It's something that we need you to report if you find it. It's simply just too old and doesn't adequately serve the needs of the church today. There's no ground wire. There's in many cases the insulation, which was primarily rubber back when this was made, has dried and cracked and flaked off. There's no protection against electrocution. There's no ground. It's just a system that's old, outdated, and needs to be replaced. Some other obvious hazards that we need you to report and to make recommendations about are missing covers, whether it be on panels or junction boxes, switches, receptacles. They need to be reported. It can lead to electrocution hazard. Physical damage can cause a short circuit, a fire. Rodents can enter. It's just a condition that needs to be reported and needs to be corrected. Something else we'd like you to be on the lookout for is the presence of ground fault circuit interrupters. And it's not always an obvious thing because the ground fault protection can be in the panel. Doesn't have to be at the point of use, but it's still something that we need you to report on and investigate. And this is obviously more for safety of people than it is for the safety of the building, but it's still a concern that we need. One of the most common things that we see with our churches is that there's excessive use of power strips, multi-plug, or octopus outlets, and this just creates an obvious overload potential and condition with the electrical circuit at a church. Document this with photos and provide a recommendation that the church have an electrician come in and properly provide permanent wiring to meet the needs of the church today. Another obvious hazard that we need reported is the improper use of extension cords. We just had a huge fire loss at a church because they had a refrigerator plugged into a light gauge extension cord. We see, again, we got the cost of providing the permanent wiring. We've got the changes that occur at a church, quite frankly, without a lot of thought and preparation and planning. So we do have a lot of improper use of extension cords. And you can see the image on the left. Not only is it improper use of extension cords, you add all that length onto an extension cord, the resistance gets much higher, and the likelihood of overloading that cord gets a lot higher. And then the image on the right, got a lot of youth, a lot of converted basements or buildings for youth groups, and they have, you know, these light shows and all these things that go on, and not always the most attention paid to providing the adequate service for that equipment. So it's here's just a picture of some temporary wiring. They've actually hardwired a dryer, in this case a clothes dryer, to power it, and this is a condition that can lead to all kinds of problems. So if you find any temporary wiring, any exposed wire nuts or conditions that could cause a problem, we need that reported as well. Here's another example of kind of temporary wiring being used as a permanent solution. They wanted to light their sign, so they used an indoor quartz work light, and they're plugging it into a homemade extension cord. And again, a couple of problems here. First, you've got an exterior condition. They're using inferior interior equipment, and it's not a permanent installation. And chances are as well, it's not a ground fault circuit interrupter. There's not ground fault protection on that cord. So the moist condition, all of this can combine to a real problem. So this type of condition needs to be while you're walking around the facility. Quite often, the ground wire coming from the service panel has been dislodged from the ground rod that extends into the ground. If you notice that condition, please report it, because that's something too that we need to be aware of and make the appropriate recommendation for. Do you note any other deficiencies? Here's just some examples of, you know, damaged and inadequate cord ends. We got insulation that's frayed and worn. We've got knockout covers removed. We've got dirty and dusty conditions. All of this can lead to problem. The image on the right, you can see even the thin wall conduit has been separated from the connector, and that's another concern. So just as minor as these conditions seem to be, we need them reported, we need pictures of them, and we need appropriate recommendations made. Another condition that we'd like to have reported is any presence of moisture or water. Here we've got a situation, and a lot of this equipment is in the basements. Churches are sometimes not properly maintained. Their downspouts may not drain correctly. Their roofs may drain into an area that seeps into the basement. These conditions need to be reported. Sometimes the mast head is damaged, and here's just a couple examples of corrosion that is caused by moisture conditions. This too needs to be reported so that we can make the appropriate recommendation to our customer. Also note and report any damage to lamp holders or covers or outlets so that we can again address the concerns. We have electrocution potential here, and we also have the potential for the entry of dust, dirt, debris that could lead to some arc flashing and degradation of this equipment. Got a couple of images here of damage caused by lightning surge, and surges can come in a couple different ways. One would be a lightning strike to the exterior of the building or to a tree out in the yard, and the surge can come in through piping or through the actual service entrance. But sometimes a surge like this can occur and the customer not even know. So we just need you to report any condition like this you see, and we also want you to report if they've installed. Here's a shot of a circuit board. We have a lot more electronic equipment with our churches today than we ever have before, and it's very susceptible to utility surges and power surges. And we also have a fatigued infrastructure out there and an overloaded infrastructure feeding our churches. And so the quality of the electricity coming in is worse. We see an increase, and we're going to continue to see an increase in surge-related damage to electronics. Just by discussing this equipment with our churches while you're out there might help move them toward eventual installation of surge protection. It won't be long, and it'll just simply be commonplace and best practice to have this equipment installed for a couple of reasons. First, the increase in the dependence on electronics and that type of thing, and because the power quality will continue to degrade over time, and more and more damage will continue to occur, and all of us insurance companies will simply require it. And with surge protection, it's a zoned approach. You install zone 1 protection at the service entrance, zone 2 protection at any distribution panel that is present, and then zone 3 is what we're used to seeing, and this is at the point of use, the power strips for your computers, the little surge devices for all your data lines and Ethernet, phone system, soundboard, TV camera, that type of thing. So it's important that surge protection be in place and that it's in 3 zones. So we need you to report when this equipment is present, and if you see some evidence of some damage or some concern, we'd certainly like the recommendation made as well. We also feel that eventually thermographic studies will be very commonplace. We have an arrangement with our equipment breakdown provider to do a fair number of these each year for us. And so some of the work that you do out in the field will provide a list of churches for us to offer a thermography study to. And this is just an example of what goes into a thermography study. It takes basically usually 3 people to do a study. First is the guy running the camera. We need a certified infrared photographer to be running the equipment and taking the images and storing the images and putting the report together. We also need an electrician there to pull the panel covers off. And the third person, we need someone from the church to put the load on all this equipment. So they need to turn on the air handlers, fire up the air conditioner units, and make sure that we've got a load on this equipment so that any deficiencies will show up. An IR study is a very compelling piece of information. It very graphically shows the areas of concern, and it's that temperature that we're watching for, and that higher temperature is an indication of a partial of an overload condition or of a bad connection. We found with our churches that we've been able to perform this service for, we found that they are very receptive to our recommendations and have made the appropriate changes to their system. Thank you again for taking the time to view this presentation. We also have obviously the customer requirements that you can refer to, and we have an electrical checklist that provides more information about what some of our concerns are and what we instruct our field staff to look for when they're out doing surveys. Thank you so much.